Republicans unveil their plan to repeal and replace Obamacare, and the measure may already be on life support. This is Special Report. Good evening and welcome to Washington. I'm John Roberts, in for Bret Baier tonight. We are getting our first look this evening at the long-awaited health care reform plan from Senate Republicans. And according to many on both sides of the aisle, the prognosis is not good. That Democrats are against the bill is a given, but Republicans have a razor-thin margin of error, and there are already indications of enough defections to scuttle the measure. Our chief congressional correspondent Mike Emanuel starts us off tonight from Capitol Hill. Good evening, Mike.
John, good evening. Republican leadership expected opposition from Democrats, but are now facing it from 4 of their own. President Trump sounds ready to deal.
Obamacare is a disaster. It's dead. Totally dead, and we're putting in a plan today that's going to be negotiated. We'd love to have some Democrat support, but they're obstructionists. They'll never support. We won't get one, no matter how good it is, but we will hopefully get something done, and it'll be something with heart.
The 142-page Senate Republican plan to scrap Obamacare and replace it with what GOP leaders say is a better system was released today. Some key differences with the House Republican bill are on tax credits to help people buy coverage. In the House, they're based on age. In the Senate, tax credits are based on age and income. Pre-existing conditions. In the House, insurers in waiver states can increase premiums based on pre-existing conditions. The Senate prohibits insurers from increasing premiums based on pre-existing conditions. Expansion of Medicaid. The House cuts funds for new beneficiaries in 2020. The Senate funding will phase out from 2020 to 2024. Medicaid cuts. The House, states are given block grants based on current per capita spending. The Senate, block grants to states would grow more slowly after 2025. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell made the Republicans' case.
Now, Democrats would tell us it'd be wrong for the Senate to actually address these problems in a serious way, while the law they've defended for 7 years teeters, literally teeters on the edge of total collapse.
However, 4 GOP senators, Ted Cruz, Ron Johnson, Mike Lee, and Rand Paul, came out against it in its current form, enough to kill the bill.
We're open to negotiation, but we want the bill to look more like a repeal. We're afraid that when we read the bill, that it actually looks like a reiteration or a keeping of Obamacare.
I want to get to yes, and the way to get to yes is fix the underlying problems, lower premiums, and I will happily be part of it.
No! Save our liberty!
Disability rights protesters were on the Hill today to oppose reductions in the growth of Medicaid spending, saying it could mean life and death for the disabled. As expected, Democrats quickly attacked the package.
It's every bit as bad as the House bill. In some ways, it's even worse. The president said the Senate bill needed heart. The way this bill cuts health care is heartless.
The speech you just heard was about a bill that he hasn't seen.
142 pages thus far of the supposed bill have been printed online, and that's what I have used.
The tension on the Senate floor over health care didn't end there.
What is being talked about here is like having a hole in the roof of your house. Instead of patching it, they want to burn down the house. So what we are not willing to participate in is burning down the house.
I would suggest to the senator from Michigan that it is the Democrats under Obamacare who burned down the House, because the individual market for health care has been decimated.
The Congressional Budget Office says it should have an estimate of the price and impact of this bill by early next week. Senate GOP leadership has set a goal of a vote before the 4th of July holiday. They say there's ample time to read and discuss it. John?
Mike, I'm not sure if it's hotter outside or inside there tonight.
Lots of tension on both sides of the aisle and even within the Republican ranks, John.
All right, thanks, Mike. President Trump today answered a question that has been hanging out there for 41 days now, announcing he did not make any recordings of his conversations with then FBI Director James Comey. The president had teased that there might be some tapes after disputing Comey's account that the president wanted a loyalty pledge. Correspondent Kevin Cork is at the White House tonight. Good evening, Kevin.
Hey there, John. As is often the case, the president's penchant for Twitter has created
made it really a controversy the White House certainly could have avoided. But today he went back to social media to try to answer the burning question about tweets he put out previously suggesting he may have recorded his conversations with his former FBI director.
I think the president's statement via Twitter today is extremely clear. I don't have anything to add beyond the statement itself.
The president's statement came in the form of 2 tweets. Mr. Trump writing, with all the recently reported electronic surveillance, intercepts, unmasking, and illegal leaking of information, I have no idea whether there are tapes or recordings of my conversations with James Comey, but I did not make and do not have any such recordings. The notion that the president might have taped conversations first arose 3 days after he fired Comey, when he tweeted, "James Comey better hope that there are no tapes of our conversations before he starts leaking to the press." Because of that warning, Comey did in fact leak details of his recollection of conversations with Mr. Trump to a Columbia University professor who shared them with the press. Comey later told Senate lawmakers he did that to set into motion the naming of a special counselor. California Democrat Congressman Adam Schiff said the president's tweets today raise even more questions, writing in a statement, if the president had no tapes, why did he suggest otherwise? Did he seek to mislead the public? Was he trying to intimidate or silence James Comey? And if so, did he take other steps to discourage potential witnesses from speaking out? The no tapes tweets came hours after the president hosted thousands at a rally in Iowa to celebrate the recent string of GOP special election victories and to promote his administration's agenda. Among his latest ideas, monetizing the border wall by using solar panels.
We're thinking of something that's unique. We're talking about the southern border. Lots of sun, lots of heat. We're thinking about building the wall as a solar wall, so it creates energy and pays for itself.
The president also said he'd ask Congress to create new rules limiting access to welfare programs for new immigrants to the U.S. for a period of time.
The time has come for new immigration rules which say that those seeking admission into our country must be able to support themselves financially and should not use welfare for a period of at least 5 years.
The president also raised a few eyebrows in what appeared to be a bit of an off-the-script moment in lauding the success and sacrifice of both his Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross and National Economic Council Director Gary Cohn. Mr. Trump told the crowd why he thought it was a good idea to hire multimillionaires for those jobs.
And I love all people, rich or poor, but in those particular positions, I just don't want a poor person. Does that make sense?
All right. Don't forget, tonight should be a pretty fun night here at the White House for the President, John. He will attend the congressional picnic. And tomorrow is a very big day here. Mr. Trump is expected to sign the VA Accountability Act that would give the agency more leeway to remove employees for misconduct and also provide more protections for inside whistleblowers. John, back to you.
Kevin Clark for us tonight at the White House. Kevin, thanks so much. An unusual, if not exactly sincere, show of support tonight for increasingly embattled House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. President Trump says he hopes she sticks around. He may not have a lot of company among Democrats after this week's big defeat in the Georgia special election. Today, Pelosi talked about all of it. Here's correspondent Peter Ducey.
Democrats are getting desperate for a win after going 0 for 2017 in contested special elections so far. So now there's talk among Democratic lawmakers about ditching the longtime Democratic leader, Nancy Pelosi.
Nancy Pelosi was a great speaker. She is a great leader, but her time has come and gone. Yes, she's a great fundraiser, but if the money that we are raising with her through her leadership is not helping us win elections, then we have to have this difficult conversation now.
And if the conversation isn't now, some Democrats fear they'll be doomed in the upcoming midterms.
If we're going to regain the majority in 2018, we have to have new leadership.
But today, the 77-year-old Democratic leader was defiant, calling out critics in her ranks.
When it comes to personal ambition, having fun on TV, have your fun. I love the arena. I thrive on competition.
These days, that support may be strongest among members of the other party.
I had a member of Congress grab me tonight, say, please tell me you're not going to get rid of Nancy Pelosi. Please tell me she's not going to retire, because that's who I run against.
Running against Pelosi was part of the winning strategy in Georgia's special election on Tuesday.
San Francisco just wanted to say thank you.
We already have Nancy Pelosi as our congresswoman. Now you're going to give us John Ossoff as our congressman.
And Pelosi may remain a centerpiece of Republican campaigns for as long as she's in power. This morning, President Trump tweeted, quote, "I certainly hope the Democrats do not force Nancy P. out. That would be very bad for the Republican Party. And please let Crying Chuck stay." One of Pelosi's predecessors as Speaker of the House says she could be valuable to Republicans for the rest of her tenure as the highest-ranking Democrat in Congress.
We'd love to have the question be in 2018, Nancy Pelosi versus Paul Ryan. And I hope that the Democrats keep her right where she is for a long, long time, at least a decade.
Democrats have lost more than 1,000 federal and state offices since 2009. So now Democrats in Congress are saying the talk about Pelosi's fate is fluid and that things would be different if there was an obvious successor. But there's not. John?
See where this goes. Peter Ducey tonight. Peter, thank you. These are record-setting times in Mexico, and not in a good way. The country's internal fight over the illegal drug trade has led to a huge increase in bloodshed. Our national correspondent William Lajeunesse looks at the numbers and what they mean.
Elected in 2012, President Enrique Peña Nieto promised to bring peace to Mexico. Instead, violence there is worse than ever. Today, Mexico is the second deadliest country in the world after only Syria, according to the International Institute for Strategic Studies. And while Syria is a war zone, experts attribute Mexico's violence to one thing: drugs.
Most of the heroin, fentanyl, and other drugs that kill our citizens and drive so much of the violent crime enter America through the porous southern border. Almost all of it is coming from Mexico.
America's drug epidemic and the violence that it breeds helped Mexico record a record 2,186 homicides in May, 30% more than last year and the highest in 20 years.
Most of these violent cases are gangs fighting each other over turf. Or trying to edge out another gang, and civilians getting caught in the crossfire.
That turf war intensified after the capture of drug lord El Chapo Guzman last year. Since then, new leaders emerged, fighting over the booming opium business. Of Mexico's 31 states, according to government statistics, violence is the worst in Guerrero, where cartels can turn an acre of poppies into $1 million of heroin. Sinaloa, Mexico's pot capital, ranks second, with almost 200 homicides in May. But the biggest jump in killings, almost 400%, occurred in Baja California, where the Jalisco cartel is fighting for the lucrative drug route into California.
It behooves Mexico, because of this critically important relationship, to watch America's back.
Now, Mexico has tried eradicating the poppy fields, and the military remains committed. But the drug war is now fueling extortion and kidnapping and spilling into tourist areas like Cancun and Cabo. John?
Troubling for a lot of Americans to go to those places. William Lajeunesse tonight. William, thanks. The FBI has arrested a man from the Bronx for allegedly trying to travel to Syria to join ISIS. The U.S. Attorney's Office says Saddam Mohammed Rashani had already helped another man make that trip. The complaint says Rashani told an undercover investigator he had been in contact with other ISIS supporters and no longer felt comfortable in the United States. The FBI says it believes the man who stabbed an airport police officer in Michigan yesterday acted alone. Our chief intelligence correspondent, Catherine Harridge, has the latest on the case and what it says about the evolving tactics of terror.
Federal investigators released a new photo of the suspect, Amor Fatoui, confirming to reporters that the 49-year-old Canadian tried to purchase a firearm days before his attack at the Flint, Michigan airport.
We have information that Fatoui attempted to buy a gun and was unsuccessful in that attempt.
Now charged with violence at an international airport after stabbing police officer Jeff Neville, investigators said terrorism charges may be added after searching his car and scouring his electronics.
We know that he's probably self-radicalized, was doing this in retaliation for the killings in the Middle East, in his words.
House Homeland Security Chairman Republican Mike McCall, who was briefed on the attack, said Fatoui was not on any watch lists and may have crossed into New York State June 16th using Homeland Security's Trusted Traveler program that provides expedited service for pre-screened, low-risk individuals.
As I talk to officials, that is what they're investigating right now, because obviously if he was, that exposes a vulnerability in our program that we have to tighten up.
We're aware of how he came into the United States. I'm just, as a pending investigative matter, I'm not going to speak to that.
With no evidence of associates or help from a foreign terrorist group, the nation's counterterrorism chief told a congressional forum moderated by Fox News that Flint fits a broader pattern.
Attacks that are not particularly complex, they're not particularly large scale, they are not particularly sophisticated, and yet they can do enormous harm.
This week's failed plots in Paris, where a known terrorist suspect rammed a police van on the Champs-Élysées, exploding a gas canister in the suspect's vehicle, and at the Brussels train station, where a suitcase bomb exploded, are part of a spike in violence during Islam's holy month.
We haven't gotten out of the season of Ramadan just yet, and we are concerned, and the Homeland Security officials are concerned about what could happen between now and Saturday.
U.S. counterterrorism analyst says the total volume of activity is at peak levels, with a significant number of plots disrupted after the targeted killing of 3 ISIS jihadists last month who were responsible for planning attacks in the West, as well as the ISIS drone program in Iraq. John.
Catherine Harrods. Catherine, thanks.
You're welcome.
A former government intelligence employee is being charged with transmitting top-secret documents to a Chinese agent. 60-year-old Kevin Mallory of Leesburg, Virginia, is an Army veteran who worked for various federal agencies and defense contractors and is a self-employed consultant. Court documents indicate that Mallory traveled to China earlier this year and received $25,000 from individuals he thought were Chinese operatives. There are increasing indications tonight that North Korea is preparing for another nuclear weapons test. The communist regime is also doing its best to provoke President Trump, who was already signaling that his patience with the Hermit Kingdom is beginning to run out. Our senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palcott tells us where things stand right now.
Reports of more trouble brewing from North Korea. Defense sources telling Fox News that the regime has tested a rocket engine which could be used on a future intercontinental ballistic missile capable of reaching the U.S. This, as sources also tell Fox, there's been a buildup of vehicles and personnel at North Korea's nuclear testing site. At least one report says a blast could come as soon as the next few days.
I am pretty sure that North Korea would be ready to test a nuclear weapon almost whenever they make a political decision to do so.
This amid other accounts, North Korea might also be willing to at least temporarily suspend its missile and nuclear tests if the U.S. were to halt its military exercises with South Korea. That so far has been a non-starter with the U.S. South Korea's president said urgency is needed.
Judging from the speed of North Korea's advancements in nuclear and missile technologies, I believe they will acquire such capability in the near future.
The brutality of North Korea was underscored with a funeral and burial in Ohio of Otto Warmbier. He died Monday after being released by North Korea last week in an unresponsive state with brain damage. He had been held for 17 months by the Pyongyang regime. President Trump underscored the administration's concern.
Went over there a healthy, wonderful boy, and you see how he came back. You see how he came back. So we've been given a bad hand, but we're going to take that bad hand and it'll all be good.
Congress is concerned as well. 2 House members introduced a bill today that would ban tourist travel by Americans to North Korea and limit other ways the regime generates hard currency.
People are increasingly enticed into coming to North Korea to visit North Korea. We've got to put an end to that.
There is no end to the rhetoric coming from North Korea. State media there today saying that President Trump is a psychopath, claiming that he's the one that could start a nuclear war. Some claim. John.
Greg Palcott tonight, Greg. Thank you. As Greg reported, Otto Warmbier was laid to rest today. About 2,000 people packed to suburban Cincinnati High School today to pay their last respects to the 22-year-old. Among them, Congressman Rob Portman, who called Warmbier an amazing young man and said North Korea must be held accountable. Warmbier was jailed 17 months ago for taking a poster from a hotel. U.S. officials suspect that he was severely beaten while in captivity. Doctors say there is no evidence to back up North Korea's claim that he fell into a coma. because of food poisoning. Up next, as the U.S. considers sending more troops to Afghanistan, another deadly suicide car bombing kills dozens of people. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 5 in San Diego, as crews work in rugged terrain during a punishing heat wave, fighting a wildfire that has burned nearly 2.5 square miles in the San Bernardino Mountains northeast of Big Bear. More than 1,200 firefighters are on the line today, aided by a fleet of water and fire retardant dropping aircraft. Fox 13 in Salt Lake City, where police say the owner of an Idaho farmhouse where the badly decomposing bodies of 3 slain women were discovered earlier this week may be in Utah. Authorities say 60-year-old Gerald Michael Bullinger should be considered armed and dangerous. And this is a live look at Dallas from Fox 4. The big story there tonight, more trouble for an ex-cop already accused of murder. Aggravated assault charges have been recommended against former Balch Springs police officer Roy Oliver, related to an April traffic accident that happened while he was off duty. About 2 weeks later, Oliver was fired and charged with murder after the shooting death of a 15-year-old boy while he was a passenger in a car. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's not Congressman, it's Senator Rob Portman. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Tropical storm Cindy has been downgraded to a depression and is weakening as it heads inland. Bands of heavy rain soaked much of the deep south and southeast. Flash flooding remains the major concern. The remnants of the storm are forecast to move into Arkansas early Friday and then up into Tennessee. Cindy is being blamed for one death, a 10-year-old boy who was killed on an Alabama beach when he was struck by a log that washed ashore. The latest effort to test the U.S. defense against a possible North Korean missile attack has failed. The Pentagon says an interceptor fired from a Navy ship failed to hit a medium-range ballistic missile that was launched from a test range in Hawaii. Defense officials are not saying what went wrong. Last month, the military did shoot down an ICBM in outer space using a missile launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. The Pentagon says it killed the top al-Qaeda leader and 2 of his associates in an airstrike in Yemen last week. There are new questions tonight about the U.S. strategy in the region following another suicide bombing in Afghanistan and the destruction of a religious site in Iraq. National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin has the latest tonight.
The self-proclaimed Islamic State blew up Mosul's Great Mosque as U.S.-backed Iraqi forces tightened the noose around ISIS fighters. The Al-Nouri Mosque is an iconic landmark where Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi pronounced the start of the caliphate in July 2014. Iraq's second-largest city was overrun by ISIS militants. Its minaret that leaned like Italy's Tower of Pisa had stood for more than 840 years.
ISIS blew it up. A mosque which sat there since the 12th century.
Iraq's prime minister tweeted that the act of destruction showed ISIS is on the verge of defeat in Mosul. Today in Afghanistan's Helmand province, at least 29 people were killed and 60 wounded in a suicide car bombing that targeted Afghan troops and government workers who were lined up outside a bank. The Taliban released a new video of 2 university professors kidnapped from the American University in Kabul last August. In the video, Kevin King, a 60-year-old American, appeals to President Trump, "Have mercy on me and get me out," adding, "Please do not send any commandos." Last summer, U.S. Navy SEALs attempted a rescue, but when they arrived, the 2 hostages had been moved. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis is deciding whether to send up to 5,000 more U.S. troops to Afghanistan. Many would be Marines sent to Helmand province.
Secretary Mattis's decision about additional forces in Afghanistan will be made in the context of a broader strategy review for South Asia.
Senate Armed Services Chairman John McCain has expressed frustration by the delay in coming up with a strategy after 16 years of war.
We are losing in Afghanistan. We just had 3 Americans killed in the last couple of days. This is not an academic exercise.
As Secretary Mattis weighs whether to send more troops, the rising number of insider attacks by Afghan troops turning on their American partners is alarming. Mattis says he will present a strategy in mid-July. John?
Jennifer, thanks. Some Republicans are urging President Trump to spend more, a lot more, on national defense. One of those people is Wyoming freshman Congresswoman Liz Cheney. She and her father, the former vice president, are going public with their case. Bret Baier talks with Liz Cheney tonight.
John, thank you. Joining us now, Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney. She is the dean of the Wyoming delegation. There's only one representative.
It's an honor to be here and to have this be my first interview, my first national interview.
Wednesday, you wrote an op-ed with your father, Vice President Dick Cheney, in which you warn about defense spending. And you write in part, in short, the situation President Trump inherited is dire. America today faces an array of threats, more serious, more complex than at any time in the past 75 years. President Obama and his policies are largely to blame.
That's right. You know, sometimes when we're talking about the defense budget, you get into a situation where people are just talking numbers. And we felt it was really important to lay out the threat we face. This isn't just about, you know, are you going to plus up defense? This is why do we need to do more, and why do we need to do more over the coming years, and why do we need to do things like repeal the Budget Control Act? And that's because America's adversaries have really used the last 8 years to build up their own defenses, in the case of the Russians and the Chinese, really targeting our capabilities, and in some instances developing weapon systems we might not be able to defend against. So we really, as a Congress, as a people, have got to look at this and say, what is it going to take to begin to rebuild our military and to undo the damage of the last 8 years?
President Trump's budget that was submitted to Congress has a 3% increase in military spending. You're saying that's nowhere near good enough.
Right. It's not anywhere close to sufficient. Both the House Armed Services Committee with Chairman Mac Thornberry, the Senate Armed Services Committee with McCain, they have both worked very diligently over the course of the last year to look at what is really necessary this year to begin to dig us out of the hole we're in. And that number is $640 billion in the base defense budget. When you look at the $603 billion number, you know, we had Secretary Mattis and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs testify before us last week. And what's clear is that number is really a tread water number. It's a number that doesn't begin to get us back on the path. And the budget itself has really significant cuts in it in places that are very concerning. They cut $1 billion out of the Navy shipbuilding budget when the Chief of Naval Operations says we need a 355-ship Navy. This budget doesn't put us on that path. They cut $300 million out of missile defense, you know, at a time when the North Koreans are very threatening and making alarming progress. That's the last thing we ought to be doing is cutting missile defense. So we really have to do more, and we've got to look at, you know, more based on what that is, what we need to purchase, not just sort of let's argue about the numbers.
You mentioned Secretary Mattis testifying. Here's part of that where he talks about sequestration, the Budget Control Act.
I retired from military service 3 months after sequestration took effect. 4 years later, I returned to the department, and I have been shocked by what I've seen about our readiness to fight. While nothing can compare to the heartache caused by the loss of our troops during these wars, no enemy in the field has done more to harm the combat readiness of our military than sequestration.
That's a bold statement.
Yeah, he's absolutely right. You know, Congress put the Budget Control Act and sequestration as part of that into place back in 2011.
Republicans and Democrats.
Absolutely. And it was an effort to try to, you know, basically put together a list of cuts that would be so draconian that it would force members to come to agreement. You know, in an effort to cut spending, an admirable effort to cut the size of the debt. Unfortunately, it has failed at those things. Instead, what it's done is really strangle the military. And partly that's because sequestration doesn't allow the military to say what are the threats and what do we need to meet the threats. It just says you've got to take a meat cleaver to the budget and cut arbitrarily 50% across the board.
But if you're Mick Mulvaney, the budget director, former congressman, you know, they make the argument the money has to come from somewhere. And it can't all come from non-defense. So what about that argument? Where are you going to find the dollars?
Yeah, I mean, look, my perspective is there is nothing that we do as a government, nothing that we do as a Congress that is more important than the defense of the nation. It's our most sacred constitutional obligation, and we have to consider it first before we consider anything else. We can't be in a situation where, you know, months from now, years from now, God forbid we're attacked, and our response as a Congress is, well, we couldn't build missile defense because because we weren't willing to do what we needed to do on the domestic side. We've got to be in a situation where we say this is the most important thing we do. And look, I believe strongly we've got to get control of our spending and of our deficit, but none of the major things we're doing up on the Hill, whether you're talking about health care reform or tax reform or balanced budget, none of those things will matter if we don't get the resources to the military that they need. And so we have to look at it as a very different kind of a thing than anything else we spend money on.
Congresswoman Cheney, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me, Brett. It's a pleasure.
John, back to you.
Brett, thank you. A California court has dismissed most of the charges against journalists from the Center for Medical Progress who recorded undercover conversations with Planned Parenthood employees about selling fetal body parts. That is according to LifeNews.com. 14 of 15 criminal counts against David DeLayden and Sandra Merritt were dismissed for being legally insufficient. The two are still facing one count of conspiracy to invade privacy. It was another mixed day on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 13 points. The S&P 500 was off 1, and the NASDAQ was up nearly 3 points. When we come back, the Senate Republicans' health care bill. Is it already dead on arrival? We'll ask the panel.
Obamacare is a disaster. It's dead, totally dead, and we're putting in a plan today that's going to be negotiated.
The president said the Senate bill needed heart. The way this bill cuts health care is heartless.
No amount of 11th hour reality denying or buck passing by Democrats is going to change the fact that more Americans are going to get hurt unless we do something.
I want to get to yes. It's not enough just to pass a bill that has Obamacare repeal in the title. We've got to actually have legislation that fixes the underlying problem.
So there you hear the debate going on in the Senate now over the new health care bill, the framework of which was announced this morning. Let's bring on our panel now to discuss more about this and whether this thing can go anywhere. Jonah Goldberg is the senior editor at National Review, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics, and Molly Hemingway, the senior editor at The Federalist. A.B., why don't you start us off tonight? Does this thing have a hope in passing because you've got a 52-48 split, and already you've got 4 Republican senators saying, you know, we're not too thrilled with this thing?
Right. Well, if you've watched Congress for a long time, you know that Mitch McConnell knew exactly what was going to happen the minute this was released. He's not surprised by these defections. I do actually believe that Senator Ted Cruz really does desperately want to get to yet. Yes, there can be some more wrangling a bit, but that could threaten the support of moderates on the other side of the Republican conference. Either way, they've decided internally that they need to get this monkey off their back. So they're going to bring it to the floor and hope that they can bring it down to 1 or 2 votes where they shame these people into opposing it and stopping the fulfillment of a 7-year promise. And if that doesn't happen, they're going to walk away. They've lost too much time and too much momentum, and there's strong indications that they are going to get this through the Senate, and if they can, pass it back over to the House and try to get this dispensed with possibly before the July 4th recess. So they're in a huge rush, and it's intentional.
In addition to Ted Cruz, the other 3 senators who are against the bill right now, Ron Johnson, Mike Lee, and Rand Paul, who calls this Obamacare light. Let's listen, Jonah, to what Rand Paul said about it earlier today.
We cannot support the current bill. We're open to negotiation, but we want the bill to look more like a repeal. We're afraid that when we read the bill, that it actually looks like a reiteration or a keeping of Obamacare.
It looks, though, Jonah, like the Senate was trying to leave in place a lot of the provisions, or at least some of the provisions of Obamacare, particularly on subsidies, particularly on pre-existing conditions. Can they win over people like Rand Paul? Ted Cruz said he's open to discussion. He wants to get to yes.
It's hard for me to see how they win over Rand Paul. He says that the Senate version took out 2 of the dozen or so mandates, the regulations that he wanted out, and he says, somewhere between 2 and 12, maybe there's a compromise in there. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But I think this is the weird irony here, is Chuck Schumer and all the Democrats insist that this is an outrageous and total repeal of Obamacare. And the conservatives, I think, much more rightly say, no, this is actually a scaling back of some of the Medicaid stuff. But for the most part, this leaves the structure of Obamacare in place. It really is Obamacare light. And I think the most telling thing that we saw today was that Mitch McConnell basically just dropped this thing like it was roadkill and said, it's your problem now. You guys figure out what you want to do with it. There was no messaging from Senate leadership about this is a great bill, this is a great way forward. He said, my work is done, and walked away. And I think that tells you something. He's setting this up for negotiation. I think that's right. But his heart's clearly not in it as a grand ideological matter.
Right. So Molly, Jonah believes that Rand Paul is not going to come on board this. But if you're Rand Paul, do you make the political calculation of, well, I hold my nose and I vote for this, or at least I try to negotiate up a little bit and get something a little better? Or do you vote against it, it fails, and you're stuck with Obamacare?
Right. It's an imperfect bill that comes out of an imperfect process. But when you think about what the option really is, you have a bill that gets rid of the individual mandate, gets rid of the employer mandate, that phases out Medicaid expansion, cuts taxes, and a lot depends on what happens in the future, but it builds a case for getting rid of Obamacare structurally over the long term. If your option is that or nothing, that's actually not the worst option that you have. At the same time, it's a bill that does a little bit more in reaching out to the moderates than the House bill did, in that it does phase these things out a little bit more gently, provides some money up front. So the best way to understand Mitch McConnell, I think, is that he picks the most conservative, politically plausible position, and that's what this bill might be.
No, I think that's largely right, and I definitely think it's an improvement over Obamacare. But I think Mitch McConnell's goal here is to say, check the box. Yeah. Hopefully we can kick this over back to the House so it's not our problem and it will die over there. But he just doesn't, he's not invested in it passionately as a philosophical issue.
When the president was in Cedar Rapids last night, he said several times he doesn't expect to get any Democratic support on this, calling them obstructionists. Certainly it doesn't look like he's going to get any Democratic support if we listen to what the Democrats said about this a little earlier. Here's Senator Patty Murray. Listen to what she said.
Based on what we are now learning, their Trump Care plan is every bit as bad as what the House passed. It is mean, to quote President Trump, meaner, it is heartless, and it is an enormous broken promise to people across the country.
And then Chris Murphy of Connecticut said, quote, no tweaks by amendment can fix this monstrosity. If you vote for this evil, intellectually bankrupt bill, it will ruin millions of lives. Doesn't sound like the president is going to get any Democratic support here, AB. But
no, but they've known that all along. Yeah. I mean, it mirrors the House bill enough. The House bill is very unpopular. And the real fear among Republicans is that they set this up as a partisan process. They have a very narrow, restrictive procedural trick they're going to use to reconciliation to have a partisan vote. The problem is they're afraid in the next few days that President Trump is going to take in the criticism and have one of his reactions and call it mean again and heartless. And that's a real risk to them putting it all on the line. And he's playing nice and quiet for now, but he called it a negotiation. So he always likes to promise that it's not over yet. And things may change, but there's a real concern among Republicans that they've stuck their neck on the line for this. It is imperfect. They're going to take a lot of heat. They own the outcome, and the president might turn on them and say this is really bad.
There are a lot of Republicans who do like this. Bill Cassidy of Louisiana is one of them, because he thinks that what it does is it addresses one of the biggest influencing factors on the House bill in the 11th hour. And that's when Jimmy Kimmel came out and told the story of his brand new baby and the heart condition, saying we all need to have coverage for pre-existing conditions. Here's what Bill Cassidy said a little while ago.
I think it begins to address the Jimmy Kimmel test. A child who is terribly ill, or any loved one, would both have coverage, but also a way to keep the coverage affordable.
So when you talk about this in the public perception, Molly, does it at least pass that test?
Well, I mean, this is actually a whole problem that we have with how we talk about health insurance, which is people are very good at telling heartbreaking stories about one side of the equation, and they're really bad. The media are really bad about telling the other side of the equation. A lot of people have suffered under Obamacare. Yes, some people have been helped by it. Some people have had their premiums go to places where they can't afford to get insurance for their family. They've been penalized with these really regressive taxes and fines for not buying insurance that they don't want. And so there are all sorts of stories that should be told in this. We should be thinking also about how, I read something today where someone was saying that half of all babies are born on Medicaid, and that's an assumption that that's a good thing. Is that really a good thing, or should we be thinking more about how to lower health care costs so that people can afford to pay their own health insurance?
I should point out, you mentioned just a little while ago that you said Mitch McConnell just sort of dropped this thing and said, I'm done with it. We just heard the president weigh in on this a second ago. He said, quote, I am very supportive of the Senate health care bill. Look forward to making it really special. Remember, Obamacare is dead.
The power of Mitch McConnell He's reined him in.
I think the president's watching us tonight. Good evening, Mr. President. Next up, is the House Democratic leader in trouble? President Trump says he hopes not.
I feel very confident in the support that I have in my caucus. I respect any opinion that my members have, but my decision about how long I stay is not up to them.
Do you think Nancy Pelosi is more toxic than Donald Trump?
You know what? The honest answer is, in some areas of the country, yes, she is. In certain areas, like in some of these special election districts, it doesn't benefit our candidates to be tied to her.
Nancy Pelosi was a great speaker. She is a great leader, but her time has come and gone. Yes, she's a great fundraiser, but if the money that we are raising with her through her leadership is not helping us win elections, then we have to have this difficult conversation now.
After the Democrats go 0 for 4 in competitive special elections, a lot of talk about whether or not Nancy Pelosi can continue on as the Democratic minority leader. Jason, what do you think?
Jonah.
Did I say Jason?
You did.
I'm sorry. We were up late last night. Molly knows.
Yeah. Look, I think the thing is, look, there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of tumult about Donald Trump and all that. Nancy Pelosi's problem is that Nancy Pelosi is a known quantity. She is literally a San Francisco Democrat. She has presided over great troubles for the Democratic Party. And while people may have lots of debates about where the GOP is, the GOP as a party is actually more popular than the face of the Democratic Party as represented by Nancy Pelosi. And we saw that in the race in Georgia. And the Democratic Party has seemed to sort of bought itself into this idea that it can cater purely to the sort of Salon magazine reading base of a couple hundred college professors, and have rhetoric that sounds like it really just doesn't like the country, and come out a winner. And that's not going to work in a lot of districts that they need to win if they ever want to take back the House.
We don't need AB to encourage President Trump to respond to this because he already did. He said, quote, "I certainly hope the Democrats do not force Nancy P. out. That would be very bad for the Republican Party, and please let Crying Chuck stay." So clearly, AB, the president thinks that her continued tenure as minority leader plays to the Republicans' favor.
Oh, all Republicans think that. They're openly begging for her to stay. She is a liability for the Democrats. She needs to go. I wrote that back in the fall. The Democrats had their chance in November, and they blew it. They did not support Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio. They supported Nancy Pelosi, and they're stuck with her. And she knows it, which is why she was more defiant today than she's ever been with her tone. She used to say that stuff behind closed doors, and now she says it out loud. You're stuck with me, because it's the middle of a cycle. She can smell being speaker again. Actually, the generic ballot definitely favors the Democrats and not the Republicans. If the race was held tomorrow, the House is definitely in play. It doesn't mean they're going to win districts like Georgia 6 or that they can even win, but she's going to hang on because she didn't get ousted in November, and so they lost their chance.
Do you think they lost their chance, Molly?
I don't know. I actually think it's kind of unfair that she is getting blamed for the Democratic Party's troubles. Yes, she is a San Francisco liberal. That is a problem. But it's really the party itself that has a lot of values that are out of the mainstream, whether it's support for abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy, support for unlimited immigration without thinking through some of the effects of that, climate change proposals that do a wealth transfer, changing laws about sex distinctions or not protecting religious minorities or Christians, in the public square. These are things that are identified with the Democratic Party and not just Nancy Pelosi. And I think it's a bigger messaging problem they have to deal with if they want to capture middle-of-the-road American voters.
So the big news coming out of the White House this afternoon was that President Trump has acknowledged that there were no tapes of his conversations with James Comey. The president tweeting, quote, "With all of the recently reported electronic surveillance, intercepts, unmasking, and illegal leaking of information, I have no idea whether there are tapes or recordings of my conversations with James Comey, but I did not make and do not have any such recordings." Adam Schiff, the ranking member on the House Select Committee on Intelligence, said, quote, "If the president had no tapes, why did he suggest otherwise? Did he seek to mislead the public? Was he trying to intimidate or silence James Comey? And if so, did he take other steps to discourage potential witnesses from speaking out?" So now it's created another controversy in Jonah. When you look back at what happened, that tweet precipitated the appointment of a special counsel. That was a fairly costly tweet for the president.
It was a bad idea, and it got him into a lot of trouble, and he's still trying to back out of it. I got to say, I I don't really care about the bluff about the tapes. I always thought it was a bluff. To me, it is a perfect example of how he tries to run his presidency like a reality show. Like, wait for the big reveal at the end of the mid-season break kind of thing. What does bother me about that tweet is his insinuation that it's entirely plausible that members of the deep state or the intelligence community or law enforcement are bugging the Oval Office without his awareness. And that is a pretty provocative charge to make. I'm sure he's making it, you know, if he ever gets pushback on it, he'll say he was just speaking tongue-in-cheek. But I thought that was the more offensive part of it.
No, that's ridiculous, though. I mean, you've had nothing but months of leaks from intelligence agencies about people affiliated with the Trump campaign or otherwise. It's not insane at all to think that there might be surveillance, since we've seen so many, again, unmasked.
What allegations that Donald Trump has been surreptitiously recorded without his approval?
What I mean, the issue there with that original tweet is that James Comey had already been leaking to the New York Times, and he'd been presenting stories as if he was some hero of the conversations he had with Trump. That tweet actually got James Comey to admit that he did 3 times tell Donald Trump that he wasn't under investigation. It got him to admit that he did say Mike Flynn was a good guy when he was asked about it by the president. And it did get him to also admit that he had pledged his honest loyalty to Donald Trump, which was contrary to what he had said to the New York Times the day before that.
It also got him a special prosecutor.
Right, which was
I think it's naive to think that that would have not happened otherwise. James Comey was clearly laying the groundwork in a campaign through his leaking. And it's kind of rewriting history.
But my point still stands. There's no evidence whatsoever that anyone was bugging or wiretapping the Oval Office or the President of the United States without his awareness.
There's a lot of leaking of
is not bugging.
Of taped conversations for a group of people that are not doing a lot of surveillance.
AB's watching a tennis match here. Let's get you to
I mean, look, Donald Trump behaves recklessly, and when he tweeted that to begin with, even though it was a quote-unquote bluff or a tease, it was reckless. I can't imagine the scene from the show The Office of people sitting around talking with Trump about June 23 is coming, and you'll have to come up with an answer on these tapes, sir. Obviously, there were no tapes, but he had to do a safe face in the end, so he had to say, I don't know. Maybe I'm being taped against my will by the evil Secret Service or the deep state, but it's also, again, that's irresponsible. If he really thought that President Obama had surreptitiously wiretapped him, then he needed to do that in private. Instead, he took it to Twitter on March 5th, a mistake.
In true Trump fashion, he has ignited yet a whole new controversy. Thanks so much, folks. Appreciate it. When we come back, Bret Hume's greatest hits. Finally tonight, today is the birthday of Fox News senior political analyst and former special report anchor Bret Hume. So in his honor tonight, we have put together a greatest hits collection.
Is that a split finger fastball? This will be a split finger lob.
And there's Bret back in 2005 demonstrating his 30-mile-an-hour fastball down the middle there, throwing out the first pitch at a Washington Nationals game. Back in 2001, Bret helped carry the Olympic torch through Washington ahead of the Salt Lake City Winter Games. And we all know that former President George H.W. Bush likes to skydive for his birthday. In 2004, Bret got to suit up and join 41. No word on whether Bret plans to celebrate his own birthday this year, number 74, by jumping out of a perfectly good airplane. Thanks for watching Special Report. I'm John Roberts in for Bret Baier. Good night from Washington. The Story with Martha McCallum is next.
Breaking tonight, Nancy Pelosi says she is